Hey, Tom, good morning.
Here comes Ned and
Hey, Tom. Hey, Tim.
George
Hey, George.
coming. There he is. Frank Daly has joined. John Grimmer.
Good morning.
Hello,
Hey,
John.
Johnny.
And here's Frank Daly.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hi, how are you all?
Hi, Frank.
Morning.
Hi, George. How are you?
Hi. Don't
We
tell
are
me,
all well, Frank. How are you?
Fine,
do
thank you.
we recognize each other?
Yeah.
Let's see. Are your names up on the screen?
There are bits and pieces, George.
That's right.
The nose, the ear.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Tom, how do I get all of the participants on my screen at the same time?
Go to there's
View.
view.
Up in the
And-
right-hand corner.
Probably in the right-hand corner. It depends on what kind of instrument you're viewing it on. But what you want is gallery view.
Okay, let me find it. Okay. Thank you. I'll be hunting for it.
All right.
So Frank, it's great that you could join this morning.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. It's like a return to Los Angeles after I lived there for 13 years. So
Oh, yeah. Here comes Gary Lombardi.
I bet Gary's got a good tan after his cruise.
How
Hi,
was
Gary.
the cruise, Gary?
welcome back.
Good morning.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to be back.
Good.
How was your cruise?
I guess we're waiting for Bob and Fred and George.
Crook.
Yes.
Crook said
Well-
that he may be late. He had
Okay.
something, I forget what it was, something medical that would take him
Mystical or,
slowly. Here comes
mystical or magical.
something like that. Here comes Fred. Fred Lawrence.
Frank, do you remember Fred? You're
Do,
ahead of
yes,
us.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
He's here in Boston, of course.
He
Haven't
is, that's
seen him
right.
since,
Yeah,
but
sure. Yeah.
Well,
But now
actually, he's in outer
love your
space.
background.
Yeah.
Fred
Hi,
is in
Fred.
outer space. Hello, Fred.
Yeah.
So okay, Crook's not going to be with us at the beginning. So who all are we waiting for? Well, Bob.
I'm
Bob.
leaving about 8 o'clock. I'm sorry, 11 o'clock. I
Yeah.
gotta get some testing that I couldn't avoid.
So Ned, you have to leave early, right?
Yeah, 11 o'clock.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's
Well-
1 o'clock here.
My
Right.
time, California.
Frank,
so
Frank, where are
Tim
you
and
now?
Frank and Fred are 1 o'clock.
Pardon, George?
What city are you in now?
I'm in Sharon, Massachusetts, which is about 15 minutes outside, 15 miles outside of Boston.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So in traffic, does that mean 15 minutes or 2 hours?
In good traffic, about 35 minutes,
Oh,
Oh,
but in bad traffic, an hour or more. Yeah.
wow. Yeah.
mhm.
That's
Boston is
similar to
becoming
most.
Los Angelesized.
Even,
Yeah, well, after being in Los Angeles, this is like driving around in a village,
is it?
you know, 5-lane, 6-lane highways, you know.
Well, you know
Frank,
what they
where-
used to say about Los Angeles is that it's the place where everybody lives a half hour from the beach, an hour from the mountains, and 2 hours from work.
Yeah, so-
Anyway,
So Frank, where were you? Did you say you lived in Thousand Oaks or the Valley or?
Yeah, I live in Thousand Oaks. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I was in My late wife taught in St. Pascal's, taught school there.
Tell us the note, St. Pascal Bailey, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then we were parishioners at St. Maximilian Colby in Westlake Village.
Okay.
Peter O'Reilly. I don't know if you know Peter, but
I know Peter very well. In fact, he's kind of a neighbor of mine, lives up in St. Lawrence Martyr.
right. in
I've
Redondo
seen him
Beach,
only
yeah.
once or twice since the COVID started, but he
He's
used-
fine. I talked to him about 3 or 4 weeks ago, so he's fine.
Yeah, I know. And then, in
Did-
fact, he's leading a gathering for a retired priest to have lunch with Roger Mahoney.
Oh,
Around, it's basically in this area too, at a Mimi's restaurant. And I think
where are you, Tom?
I'm in Redondo.
Oh,
Redondo.
okay. Yeah.
Normally he has his surfboard stuck behind his video there because he usually hits the surf after we have our meetings.
No, I'm afraid the surf would hit me much too hard.
Not to mention the teddy bear.
Right.
Tom,
Tom.
wasn't Paul Dotson at St. Pascal Bailey or at one
He's
point?
he's up here at St.
Well, I know where
Lawrence.
he is now, but I thought he had some, I think maybe his aunt, his grandparents lived
Oh.
in St. Pascal Bailey's parish.
When I was there, it was Monsignor George was there and Dave Heaney was there at St. Pascal's.
Yeah,
But Peter was at St. Maximilian Colby.
right.
Tom, could you pull up an email that has Bob Bonnot's contact info? I'll give him a call just in case he's lingering over a cup of coffee, or if you could
Okay,
just give me his phone number and I'll call him.
that may be more difficult to, let me see if I put it in my contact list.
Yeah, I think there was one message that had his,
I have it, George.
oh, do you?
It's 330
Okay,
397
okay,
1257.
okay, good. I'll give him a call right away. I'm going to mute myself here. Okay,
Good.
and I will also,
But should we introduce ourselves to Frank? Or have you done that already?
So we have it.
Anything, except my email where I sent him the list of all of us. But how about a prayer?
Yes.
Anybody prepare for a prayer?
Well, given that we're still praying for the conversion of Russia, which I guess didn't happen, how about a Hail Mary to start off the proceedings?
Sounds good to me.
He
hey,
does.
Bob,
Name of
hey, we're on
name
our
of the-
Zoom call. Are you going to join us?
Hold on here.
Yeah, why don't you, let me see, let me just, can you hear me?
Yeah,
No, can the group hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Group here
Yeah,
too.
so Bob is saying he's trying to use your link, Tom, but it's not working. Can you try again? Can you go back to your email, Bob, and get the most recent one?
Worked for everybody else.
Yeah, log off and try again.
Because it's working.
Tom, yeah. Tom will be waiting for you to let you enter.
Yeah, because I sent it just about 45 minutes ago.
Yeah, we got it.
That's the way I got in.
Yeah, join
There
with
it
video.
is. The Association of U.S. Catholic Priests has entered the waiting room.
Bob says he's been waiting. Oh, here he comes,
Yeah.
his association.
Yeah.
Okay, Bob.
Not working yet.
Okay.
Yeah. It shows Bob's video off. And,
Yeah,
and
Bob is
the-
trying to
and
get that
the,
straightened out. Yeah.
and muted.
Yeah.
So. you're-
Bob, are you
protected,
in your
Bob.
RV? There
There
he
you
is.
are.
Okay.
Waiting goes together with Melchizedek.
Oh, now you're gonna have to listen to
There
me.
we are. Now we go.
Bob, did you bring the offering of bread and wine according to
Gosh,
the
I
order of
missed that.
Melchizedek?
No, I thought you were Melchizedek. I'm just an observer.
Oh, my beard might look a little more like his. I don't know.
Yeah. So there's Fred Lawrence. My gosh, it's been a long time since I've seen you, Fred.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I'm always grateful for you, the way you, to use a wildly inappropriate expression, covered my ass as a sacristan.
Did I say that?
No, you did it, but I said it.
Oh, you said it. Okay. Oh, my. Where's George? I'm not seeing. There's George. And
I
there's
have
Frank.
my cap on. Yeah, right.
Okay, yeah, we can cancel the phone. I'm gonna check off.
Okay, so now why don't we follow up with Gary, your idea of introducing ourselves? So we do that
Didn't-
briefly and
Tim, did you lead us in the prayer, the Hail Mary, or were you going to?
Not yet.
Got
Not yet.
interrupted. Okay.
Name of the
Tim
Father, in
suggests
the
to pray for the conversion of Russia. We may want to pray for the conversion of Vladimir Putin in particular.
also Kirilli. How about him?
Yes.
Yeah.
What a scandal.
So, name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Hail Mary,
Hail Mary,
full of grace,
full of grace.
The
Lord is with
with you.
Blessed
Blessed
art
art
thou.
thou among women,
Blessed
and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary.
Holy Mary,
Mother of
Mother of God,
Pray
for us sinners, now
and
and at the hour of our death. Amen.
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 Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
De nada.
So
Okay.
introductions, Gary, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm Gary Lombardi, and I actually went to the seminary in Los Angeles with all of these guys here. And then in my last year, I ended up not becoming a deacon for the archdiocese, so I eventually had to find a different diocese, and I came to the Diocese of Santa Rosa. And I was ordained, and actually I was ordained, Wednesday would be 53 years ago. I was ordained March 9th of 1969. I spent my entire life in the Diocese of Santa Rosa as a pastor, eventually a pastor, and I was also director of clergy education. And I was part of the NOSER, the organization. Frank, were you ever part of that? I don't know.
No.
Yeah, there was but an association of clergy education directors, and I retired in August of 2017, and so I've enjoyed being retired. It's been a wonderful time. I can dip my toe in parish water, but I don't have any responsibilities or anything else, or any attachments or connections. So I'm very happy that way. And I joined this group John, when did you invite me? A couple of months ago, it seems like now.
Seems like forever.
Well,
Yeah.
a couple of months, there you are.
Time flies. Yep.
You know, I'm just seeing a lot of Rorschach.
I wonder if Bob fell off his chair.
Yeah.
Bob, are you with us?
Yep, I think I have. What happened here? Okay, it's a camera problem.
Yeah,
And so I have to get myself organized again here.
but can you hear us?
Now, yeah, I can hear you.
There you go.
Everything's coming through
Now
fine.
it's-
Now you have to
Alright.
see me there.
Okay,
Might be the electronic version of the Emperor's New Clothes.
so do we want to go around? I don't know if we all have our screen identical to each other in terms of where we are. and we can-
Probably
how do we
not
want-
in the
Okay.
order.
Okay, well, Tim, since I could just say, Tom, do you want to go next? Or could you go next?
Well, I guess I could. The problem is, like with some of you, the problem is shutting me up after my 2 minutes. But
You
But,
don't get two.
I was in the seminary with all of these guys and ordained at Lifer and ordained at St. John's in 1968 for the Archdiocese of LA. Spent most of my life as a parish priest, but I had 2 years, and there's an odd story behind that, in Rome, studying liturgy at San Anselmo, living at the Casa from 72, 73, and then 75, 76. And I'm probably the only one in existence who actually asked for and had to kind of fight to go into further studies because in the Archdiocese of LA, I wanted to study liturgy very, very badly and be of service in the liturgical reform and renewal in LA. But there were significant powers who were very, very much afraid of anybody coming on the scene with a tiny bit of knowledge or interest in liturgy. So I think I was regarded as dangerous. I was grudgingly allowed to go to study liturgy. My first choice was actually Catholic U. My second choice was Notre Dame. But I was allowed to study liturgy and then told I had to go to Rome because, you're all going to laugh at this, because the powers that be felt that Rome was a lot safer than safer orthodoxy-wise than Catholic U or, God forbid, Notre Dame. So I had a good year in Rome. I wanted to make it at least 2 years. I wanted at that point to get a doctorate, but they would not give me more than 1 year to go there. And then I get back and Cardinal Manning was saying, well, Tom, why don't you go and finish your, finish your course of studies there? And I said, well, I can't until you wouldn't give me permission. I didn't say that, but I can't until the cycle Rome comes around again, which should be 2 years. So I was back in Rome 74, 75. And decided not to go on for a doctorate because it was really difficult getting back into the swing of study. I was with a whole new class of people and I just never quite got into it. So I did a decent job on getting a license. Came back to parishes, did a little work in liturgy in LA, but I think they still thought I was too dangerous and never managed to get any kind of official position or support other than member of the liturgy commission and the one that everybody talked to, or the one that everybody who needed some work done, they called me. So I spent 11 years actually in campus ministry, then became a pastor in Claremont with Bill Barry, following Bill Barry, being careful not to fall into his humongous footsteps. And then was 6 years in Beverly Hills, which was not the best of experience, but it was probably a good preparation for retirement. And I retired in 2015. So in a nutshell, and I was living for 4 years in Nazareth House in LA. When COVID struck, it became advisable to drop my anchor somewhere else, and so I did manage to be useful in a private living situation. So here I am.
Okay, Ned, you're next on my screen, so do you want to
Sure.
take it?
Like everybody else here, with the exception of the Rome gentleman, priest. I went to the seminary with all these guys. My last year of theology, I asked, rather than to be ordained with the class, if I would be allowed to go out into the parish as the deacon that I was ordained and experience parish life. I was then considered a troublemaker again, as Tom was, I guess, and received lots of negative grace from the chancellor of the diocese. I was in 3 different parishes following that, and then left the idea of the priesthood. I went to teach in a inner city school, high school, and then went for a year and a half onto a very getting into it in a very convoluted way. I was a Western States regional coordinator for George McGovern for president. And that was an experience I'll never, ever forget. Went to law school, and I'm a lawyer, been practicing for a long while. And married, 2 boys, 9 grandkids, and very happy.
Johnny?
Hi, I too joined our class in 9th grade and stayed until the middle of 3rd theology. I guess they trusted me a lot because I was a master of ceremonies, a sacristan, went to summer after 2nd theology to work for Monsignor Frank Weber. He's still alive, I think, isn't he, Tom?
I think so, yeah.
Archivist. By the way, I think Kreckelberg was a year behind us, and he became the archivist for Orange County and the diocese. So I live in Irvine, been divorced many years, but we have 4 great kids, 11 grandkids and 2 great grandkids. Most recently, I have worked for the parish here as director of adult faith formation, but I had insurance and franchising and teaching in South Central, similar to what Father Barron does, and specialized in at-risk kids that were on probation or expelled from regular school. And really grateful to Tom and Ned and George, who I think stirred the pot to get this started. I just happened to get connected on the telephone, but really look forward to our Friday get-togethers. Thanks.
And Tim?
Good morning. My name is Tim Almy, and I am someone who left early. I left in the middle of freshman year of college. Don't know why, but I did. And went on, earned a PhD in political science, taught at the University of Georgia for 13, 14 years. And then started to pursue
the almighty dollar. So I was in Georgia, and midlife crisis when I turned 40, I said, I want to make more money, and motivated by a lot of different reasons. And so I went into the money management business, which I have remained in up to 3 years ago when I finally sold my own money management firm. I live in Flat Rock, North Carolina, which is about 25 miles south of Asheville in the Blue Ridge Mountains. 3 kids, 1 granddaughter. Extremely happy with my reassociation with these guys that I had not literally seen since probably freshman year of college, except for Crook and Shavera and Bremer I saw about 10 years ago at Ned's house. Just kind of a happenstance. I was visiting my sister and brother in Southern California, and Johnny Bremer, bless his soul, has kept this group together. I mean, it's just and these Friday things have just become the second or third most important thing in my day. And so I love these, and I love these guys, and it's amazing how virtually you can rekindle friendships that go back how many years? 60? Wait. They all look as young as they did, but
Liar, pants on fire.
I know. So that's me. And it's nice to see you two guys.
Yes.
Fred?
I'm transferring my place, so let you go first, and I'll go.
Okay, I'll go first. Well, first I want to thank you, Bob and Frank, for taking some time this morning. Maybe it'll take more than one morning, I don't know, depending on what happened, but that you're here, because I think you've had, as Gary and Tom, kind of extraordinary priestly lives. Bob, we'll find out a little bit more about you, but I know you were at Hallmark, and Frank, you were married for 13 years, right, in between being a priest and then married and then coming back to serve in a parish. So that's kind of extraordinary. Myself, I'll just tell you, I served in 3 parishes, and then I resigned in 1976 and married, became a stepdad, and got a license in marriage and family counseling. Do you remember Ken Burr?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He had been in Rome, and he left and became a psychologist. So I asked him where to study, and he recommended a place to get some graduate study in family studies. And so I became a licensed marriage and family therapist. But let me tell you, and then I went on to be a mediator with the court, working with divorcing and separated families, or cases where parents were no longer together and they were in dispute over the care of their children. So I did that. That was my whole career until 2012, and I retired from that. So let me just list a few priests that I've known, just to give you an idea of, and that's why we invited you, Bob and Frank, because, in the news, there's been talk about today's seminarians and the priesthood, et cetera, et cetera. So we thought it'd be good to get your perspectives. But I'll give you a list of priests who were influential in my life from the time I resigned. One was George Regas, who is at All Saints, the largest Episcopal church west of the Mississippi, and he was the rector there. And then Alice Callahan, who is at Casa de las Familias in Los Angeles, working with immigrants, but she had been the Order of the Holy Childhood teaching order, and she became an Episcopal priest. An Episcopal priest whom I met in my last parish, we were part of a little ministerial association, who married me, Clifford Gain, later came out as gay and was divorced from his wife. I've been in parishes. The first parish I came to up here in 2000, the rector, Jim Stickney, since I went sideways into the Episcopal Church and became a member down in Pasadena, he turned out to have been a Jesuit in Northern California. Then we've had a woman Episcopal priest, lesbian Episcopal priests, and what else? What else can I tell you? Oh yeah, then I have a good friend who's a Roman Catholic woman priest. The group of women priests who have said, if not now, when? So they're following the spirit. And she was a good friend in San Diego, kind of like a family friend, a relative, Bertha Popeny. And I wrote a letter of recommendation for her. So that's kind of the scope of different types of priests that I've known and that have been significant in my life. So, okay.
And tell them where you live. You got to tell them where
Oh
you
yeah,
live.
I live right near Berkeley, up in the Bay Area. So I'm up in San Francisco. We just had like an earthquake a half an hour ago, which was good because it got me away from the breakfast table and up here. I said, my God, I got this video coming up. Zoom, I better get it. So I'm glad that earthquake happened. Yeah, so I live up here in the Bay Area for the last 20 years. And so it's been interesting because the Roman Bill Levada, and who was in Rome, and then George Niederauer were both led the San Francisco diocese. A former sister-in-law of mine went to Holy Redeemer Church, San Francisco, which was famous for being a very friendly place to gay people. It's in the Castro district of San Francisco. And I went over there for some services and so forth. So it was very conservative, and it still is with Cordileone. It's some kind of ironic twist of fate that they would put somebody like him in the cultural situation of San Francisco. What else? Yeah, so anyway, yeah, and there's a graduate theological union here. And I also know Bob Charpentier. Do you remember him? He came over, and he lives about 10 minutes away from me, and he ended up coming out west and becoming a psychologist, and worked actually in an association or agency that worked counseling clergy psychologically. In other words, if somebody needed a psychological assessment prior to ordination, largely with Protestant clergy, but also with some Catholics, I guess. So that's kind of it for me here. Fred?
Okay. I was together with these guys from their sophomore year up until the end of my second year in theology. I was chosen to go to Rome. At Rome, I got tremendously involved with Lonergan because I had a lot of further questions due to my not so hot experiences taking census in the old way of doing it, where the parish, everyone was considered a member of the parish if they were in the geographical scope of the parish. And I couldn't answer their questions, and I knew I just was not able, but I wanted to be able to. So I studied there for 3 years. And after the third year, I left and went into theology at the University of Basel in Switzerland, because many times in conversation with Lonergan, he would always ask me after I asked him a question, have you read some book in German? And so I didn't know German, but many times I could read a good Spanish translation of the works. But I realized if you're gonna be interested in theology, you better know the German context. So I went to the University of Basel. I was there for 6 years, and I ended up writing a dissertation on a philosopher named Hans-Georg Gadamer, who talks about hermeneutics, and ended up, because my doctor father thought that that wasn't theological enough, I ended up doing it on Gadamer and Lonergan. Someone used the word humongous. so was that dissertation. So after that, I never made an application to teach anywhere. And I had many offers. And I ended up coming to Boston College, where I've been since 1971, teaching undergraduate and graduate theology. And I'm blessed to be able to keep doing it now at the age of 81.
Wow. Wow.
So I have, after I was leaving the seminary, by a set of miracles, both on my wife's side and on my side, we met and got married, fell in love and got married. We have 2 children and 8 grandchildren. And we're living now with my daughter and her husband and 3 kids due to the health problems I've had. And I used to live on a big hill, and I could no longer really manage the hill. So that's it. Thank you.
Where do you live, Fred?
Oh, I live in Brookline,
Okay.
just on the edge of Boston,
Yeah.
just on the edge of Chestnut Hill.
Right.
Thanks, Tom.
So George Crook is not here to get this thing
Well,
kicked
he said
off,
he'd
but
probably be coming somewhere around between 10:30 and 11, he hoped.
okay. But Tim, do you want to kick it off
Wait
with
a minute.
Gary?
George, I'd like to hear Frank
Oh,
and
yeah,
Bob's
sure,
story.
of course.
Yeah.
Frank and Bob's, yeah.
Yeah,
Bob,
yeah.
they both have unusual stories. Yes,
Well, it'd be interesting to hear them.
yes, that's right.
Rick, do you want to start or you want
Yeah,
me to
okay.
start?
All right, I'll go. Well, I was in Rome with George and Bob and Fred. I didn't know Fred that well there, but I was a year behind him, I believe. And then I came back to Boston, and I was in 2 parishes, campus ministry, priest personnel. And after 9 years, I took a leave of absence and married. And I was married for 37 years. My wife was disabled by a stroke for the last 12 years of her life. She died 7 years ago, last month. And then I kind of said, well, I'm 72 years old. I might have a few more years in me. And I can't stand the thought of sitting around shopping, playing golf, getting a fancy car, all of that kind of stuff. So I need something to do. And I went and talked to my pastor and floated the idea that I might, come back to the ministry. He was very supportive, though it was somewhat unheard of.
I was going to ask you, has anyone done that? Is this a
At
unusual
the time
thing?
that I did it, there were 2 other cases in the US that I'm aware of.
Wow.
One in somewhere in the Midwest and one in the Diocese of Fresno, I heard.
Well, I know Bob Charpentier was on a similar course as you, Frank, and was unsuccessful.
Right,
He figures because he didn't go to a heavyweight prelate.
right.
Or,
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Because so then I went to the diocese and they asked me if I just wanted to say mass, which apparently they can write a letter and say you can say mass, but only in private. And I said, no, I want to do some ministry. So they said, what are you willing to do? So I held on to my wallet and I said, well, what do you mean? They said, would you go to the seminary? I said, yeah. So there's a seminary here in Boston for older men. It's a national seminary called Pope St. John the 23rd. And I went there for an academic year. The average age is about 48 there. Although when I left, it went down a little bit. And so I spent a year there. The first semester was basically for them to determine whether I was sane or not. When I was in Rome, my classmate from Boston was a guy named Jim Bretta, who George and yeah, Fred will know. And Jim was quite a character. He left, but he's very he has real health problems and severe arthritis and that. But we talk regularly. And I think I just lost this. Let me see. Can you hear me? Oh, here it is. Yeah. So we talk regularly, and I called him up and I said, Jim, do you know what I'm going to do? He said, no, what? I said, so I told him. Well, first I said to him, are you sitting down? He said, I'm laying down. I said, well, that's even better. Do you know what I'm going to do? And he said, no. And so I told him, and he said, are you out of your effing mind? Then he recovered and he was fine with it. But so I did that. I went through that whole battery of psychological testing that we never, when we went to seminary, they said you were a nice boy from a nice family. And, we know what kind of problems that caused. So I went through a battery with two psychologists, one from Massachusetts General Hospital. And so then they invited me to join. So I spent a year there. The first half of the year, I think, was them trying to figure out whether I was sane or not. And the second half, in January, they sent my papers to Rome. And Cardinal O'Malley was very much supportive of the whole thing. But what happened in Rome was, because of my age, my papers went to Doctrine and Faith, because that's at the time that I was laicized, that's where it was done. But only a few years afterwards, it went to clergy. So Doctrine and Faith said no 3 times. O'Malley kept going back. And so then he's not the kind of guy, years ago we used to say John Cody would come to Rome with wads of bills to get done what he wanted to get done. O'Malley's not the kind of guy to use his closeness to the Holy Father to ask, can I have another couple of auxiliaries or that kind of thing. But he did speak to him and tell him the story. And the Holy Father said, take my file from Doctrine and Faith, and take it over to clergy and tell them at clergy that he said to do it. And then it happened.
Wow. Wow.
Bless his heart.
Well, that's why with Bob, it bothers me in a sense that, if it were a small bishop, a bishop from a small diocese somewhere who didn't have access and just to have a chat with the Holy Father in the corridor, it wouldn't happen for that man. So, but at any rate, it happened. I came back. I was married for 37 years. I have 2 children and 5 grandchildren. My daughter actually lives in the next town. My son is a doctor in the Army in Colorado. And it's interesting because sometimes of course, my parish all knows the story, but I'll be dressed to my clerics or something, and just offhand, I'll say,
My
I was
kids.
talking to my daughter the other day, and they start, So I tell them it's too long to tell the story. They're going to have to wait to see the movie. So I came back and for 5 weeks I was in South Boston, which is a well-known area in Boston. And I actually, it was a return in a way, because when I first took a leave of absence, I taught there part-time during the busing crisis in Boston. And then they asked me to come here as pastor, which is a parish that needed a lot of healing because it was in a collaborative. They sent in a pastor who was absolute worst possible fit. They got out of the collaborative. It's a community in which Catholics are a distinct minority because there's a very large Jewish population here. So it's a very interesting place with a lot of, and I've been here 5 years and I'm retiring the 1st of June. So.
Wow.
Frank, have you had much contact with Arthur Kennedy, my classmate?
Yes, I see Arthur on occasion, Fred, and he's doing well. He's retired and living in Dedham at St. Mary's. Yeah, Arthur's doing well. Yeah.
And I have-
I'm surprised that you and he haven't had Lonigan discussions.
We have.
Oh, you have? Okay, yeah.
But I wanted to ask, when you were in that procedure of trying to get reestablished as a priest, did you ever mention that you were in the order of Melchizedek?
No, I did. Well, except that I was in seminary with an African man from the Congo who was studying for Boston. He's a priest now in Rentham, not far from here. And he would never accept the fact that laicization really meant much. And he used to sit behind me in chapel, and every time Melchizedek came up in the Psalms or the readings, he'd poke me in the back.
Was that because of your age?
And so then
That's Methuselah.
before I had decided to come back, and one afternoon I went to this Glastonbury, Benedictine Abbey in Hingham, just to pray for a while because I wanted to go to dinner. It was too early. So I stayed there and I was ready to leave. And Father Andrew came in and he said, "We have Vespers." So I said, "I'll stay for Vespers." And I was pretty much decided that I would go back. And of course, the first psalm in Vespers were, "You're a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek." I said, bingo. I'm skeptical of those who open the book and close their eyes and press their hands, but I didn't write it off. I hedged. So,
That's
anyway,
great.
there I am.
Hey, Frank, one other thing, could I just ask you, when I was on sabbatical in 2002 for 5 months, we were in Rome at the North American College there. There was a guy from Boston named George Morin. Do you know him?
Yes, I know George. Yeah. My problem is that I have a 40-year gap.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I don't know a
That's
lot
my
of
point.
but in the seminary, I met some of the younger men. But most of the men in the seminary were from other dioceses, other countries, Canada, Puerto Rico. Well, Puerto Rico is not another country, El Salvador, that kind of thing. But and states all over the US.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Well, how did you broach this with your kids?
Well, I sat down and I didn't really sat down, and just in passing and conversations, I said, "This is what I'm thinking of doing." And actually, there was an article written in it was actually front page on Sunday in the Boston Globe. There's a guy named Tom Farragut who writes human interest stories. And he's a great guy. He's wonderful. He wrote a beautiful article, actually. And then he interviewed my children. And he asked my daughter what she thought. And she said, "My father is a special guy. I think it's wonderful that he will be a priest again." So
Wow.
I had, complete support from them. It was never an issue.
How sweet.
And they know I love their mother. They know I took care of her for 12 years, 24/7 as a caregiver. So there was no issue really.
Mhm.
Wonderful. Fantastic.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. Yeah.
So what about Bob's story?
Yeah, you want me to give you a bit of my story? I'm one of 5 children, 4 boys and a girl. Unfortunately, the youngest of us, my sister Sue, she was up in a state of Washington and she died suddenly. So she was the youngest of us. My older brother is 2 years beyond me. And then I came along, and then my next brother a year later, and then my next brother a year later. So we had 4 boys, and Sue then was 3 years later. So she is the first of our loss. My father, and in a certain sense, our history was very influenced by the Jesuits. My family on the male side, the French dimension of me came over from France, and they wound up developing a company in Canton. And there were 9 boys, I think, in that family, and all of them were sent to Campion School up in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. And so my dad went there, my uncle went there, and the other uncle, all 3 of them went there. And the oldest of them, Uncle Paul, not Uncle Charles, he actually, where's that coming from?
It's coming from me.
No, it's coming from you, okay, because I've had that problem in here. So in any case, the oldest of them actually went on, became a Jesuit, and he was a missionary over in India for 24 years after his ordination. And those were the days when you went to India and you didn't come home. Yeah, so we're picking up again. Don't know why that's happening. So in any case, and then my dad, who was next, when he got out of Campion, he wanted to become Jesuit. So he went off and went into the novitiate. And but they decided that he wasn't, destined for that. So he actually became a physician, an obstetrician. And so when my oldest brother hit his age, that was the destiny. He was going to go to Campion, and he went up, but he hated it. And I had one visit, he was very upset about being up there, and Mom went up to visit with him, and I think they let him come back in the middle of the year, but I went up with my mom. I couldn't wait to go to Campion. I thought it was just great, everything that I experienced up there. But then the Christian Brothers came to Central Catholic High School in Canton, and that's where Chuck went, my older brother, and that's where I went, and that's where all of us went. And Mom and Dad were comfortable with that. They certainly appreciated the Jesuit teaching, but when the Christian Brothers came, they thought, okay, you can go there because you'll get a good education from the Christian Brothers. So I started out there in a high school in my freshman year, and I became very taken by the brothers who were doing the teaching. They were by and large young guys. There were some older guys that were there. The principal was an older guy and all that. And my favorite was the Latin teacher. He was just a super, super good guy. And then they had their vocation director came, and he gave a talk one time, and he talked about the brothers and all the rest of it. And when he was done, he said, "If you don't like my apples, don't shake my trees." I never forgot that, but I wanted to shake his tree. So, I went in the middle of my sophomore year to the Christian Brothers. My Jesuit uncle had come back from India because his health broke. And so another of my great memories was, when I was close to leaving to go to the Christian Brothers juniorate, as they called it, he sat me down. I can remember up in my parents' bedroom, he sat me down and he said, "Now, Bob, wouldn't you really rather to be a priest?" And I said, "No, Uncle Charles, I want to be a brother." So off I went, and 6 months later, I wound up in the seminary. So it was a kind of a thing there, and I became a diocesan priest. And my seminary training was at 2 years, 4 years actually, down in Cincinnati at the seminary they had there for high school, and the first 2 years of college. And when I reached that end, then I had the privilege of being a Basilian scholar sent down to Catholic University. And then from there, I was sent on to Rome at the North American College. And so that's kind of my educational side. But then when I came back, I got into a number of different things. And the bishop, who was James Malone, Jim Malone, many of you older fellows might know of him, very, very able. Yeah, Youngstown, that's my diocese, Youngstown, Ohio. And he was the president, the first non-archbishop, non-cardinal president of the USCCB. And so he was very respected. Anyhow, he got me into the education department, and he wanted me to develop into that. And so he said, figure out where you want to go to school. And an older priest, very bright guy, he was kind of a counselor, ran a parish. He was an older fellow, and he said, "Oh, you don't want to go to Catholic. Don't go to a Catholic school. Go to something like Harvard. Go to something like Columbia. Go to something like the University of Chicago." And I wound up going there because they had made an administrative program, educational administration, and I got a Ford grant to cover the expense of it. So I felt very comfortable with that. And while I was there, the beauty of the University of Chicago, you could be pursuing a doctorate in a given thing, but it was very minimal what you had to take in terms of the basic presentations. And then they said the rest of the campus is your your playpen. Go to any classes you want. Go and take any courses you want. Well, the blessed thing was that they have a wonderful divinity school, and so I had Martin Marty as one of my doctorate programs and all the rest of it. And I got a master's in religious studies. Dave Tracy was there at the time. I think I went to one of his classes, and it was like, what did he say? How can I keep up with this? So anyhow, that's kind of where I came from. And then I came back, and the guy that was supposed to do adult religious education had been a Christian brother who became a priest in the diocese. And then he left and got married. So they put me into that. So I wound up doing that. And, I was just helping at different parishes. So from until 81, and we had a Hungarian parish that it was founded in 1905 with the first wave of Hungarians coming into Youngstown to work the steel mills. And then they had another inflow of people in 1948, which were the elite of Hungary, when the Russians, took over, the communists took over, and they got out. And then the people that were at the parish and that I most enjoyed were the people that came out in 1956, when the Russians left and said, "Okay, we'll let you do what you want to do." And then he came back 2 days later and took the place over again. And they made the escape and wound up in Youngstown. And they're two of my best friends still to this day. So that's some of the background that I had. And when I was down working at the diocese and I had the parish, I wanted to do a lot of reading and do some writing and all the rest of it. And I really didn't have much time to do it. I got into one thing after another. And the bishop asked me to take on communication. And that happened because the head of religious ed and then myself doing adult religious ed, and the head of communication and his assistant, who was a very vital, creative Ursuline sister, we were all in the same room with just dividers. It was part of the old school classroom. And so this young man who came down from Youngstown State University, it was just at the edge of going into the cable TV. And it wasn't in Youngstown at all at that point. And he said, why don't you take these videos and go and put them out on cable? And I said, what's cable? Because it was not there in any case. And he got me into that, and one thing led to another. And we worked together with a Cleveland hospital thing that had set up a tower. down within the diocese, kind of a central point. And I proposed to the bishop that we start a network for the diocese. And when he first saw the proposed cost, he said, can't do that. It was turned down by, I think, both the clergy and the lay, the diocesan pastoral council. But then when we started to work with this hospital, we didn't have to put up a tower. We didn't have to do any of that. All we had to do was feed a signal to their tower, to their thing, because they had 4 channels under the educational process. And I think Los Angeles was way ahead of that already. But anyhow, I got into that and we set up a system in the diocese. And then the bishops had set up, and we're still starting very much to start a network that I won't go into the details unless you ask about why, but it wasn't working. And they had an engineer who first found it, started it, and then they needed to get somebody new, and my hat was thrown in, and I wound up serving as the president of the Catholic CTSA, the Catholic, not CTSA, but the Catholic, the bishops network. And then I had an opportunity in the diocese to work with the ecumenical community, including the Jewish community, to do religious television. And one of the beautiful things about Malone is he established a wonderful relationship with all the other religious leaders in the community, including the head rabbi of the diocese. And so they were part of it. And then it came back in. When the rabbi died, he asked that Malone give the homily, give the preaching. So in any case, that led to my getting involved with the Hallmark Channel. And I was doing that from 90 until 2006. I was called back to the diocese, had an administrative year at one parish that had lost its pastor, and then got into another parish in 2007 and was there until 2016 when I retired. And I had long had a fantasy of kind of roaming around the country in an RV. So I did it for 5 years. And just this past year, I said, I've had enough of that. So I'm settled down back now in the diocese. And it was, that's what's given me the opportunity to do the writing that I've done that led to the book on Jesus as a priest. The bishop, not the bishop, but the priest who really took me under his wing and recommended Chicago, he's the one who got me off on writing something. And he said, you need to do some writing. And I never got it done until, after he was gone, and I was
Probably more than I should have talked about.
By the way, I was out in Los Angeles with Hallmark for 7 years, and I lived with Bob Milbauer. Some of you who know the priests of Los Angeles. I was at his De La Salle parish out in Granada Hills.
Granada Hills, yeah.
Granada Hills, yes, I missed the name.
By the
Robert,
way,
have you ever-
the pastor of St. Euphrasia, the neighboring parish there, kind of been there for some time, I guess. No, I cannot think of his name. Anyway, he just died. He was struggling with cancer for a number of years, but it was COVID that took him because of his compromised immune system. And his funeral is going to be next week. Anyway.
Bob, were you ever part of No Circ?
No, I was
The
never
national-
part of it. I was aware of it, but I got appointed to it. I was involved with the National Federation of Priest Councils, and I was actually, for a very brief period, kind of presumed to be an active. They become the leader of it, and that whole thing fell apart as that was starting. But I was on the board for, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years.
For the through No Circ, I met a guy whose brother was in my home parish down in Los Angeles, a guy named Hugh Fulmer. I think he's part of the group that you're with now, that Association of Catholic Priests.
Yes, yes, I probably would know him to see him. I'm not great at capturing names and remembering them, but yeah, we have a wonderful group of priests from all across the country in the Association of U.S. Catholic Priests, which you see our logo in the back there. Let me just say, if I can, I'm delighted to see that this kind of thing is going. And George, maybe you can clarify, this has been going on for a long time, but the short that I want to mention is I've been meeting with a group of 4 men, like yourselves, 2 of whom were ordained priests and 2 of whom then moved back from priesthood. Both of them married. The one fellow is divorced. He had several children that are grown and adults now. And the other one, Dick Ross, and Fred Lawrence. You probably know Dick Ross because he came up to your Boston workouts all the time.
Yeah,
He's deep in Lonergan. But we get together every 2 weeks and have a conversation. And the third fellow is a theologian who had gone to the seminary for the Missionaries of the Sacred Heart. And then he got his doctorate out at Creighton, and he was at the seminary up in Rochester, and very active in social justice and all that sort of thing. And then he moved to Walsh University, which is the only Catholic institution of higher education we have in the Diocese of Youngstown.
give my best to Dick,
Yeah, I'll certainly do that.
please.
Did we lose Frank?
Dick Ross.
Oh, no, Frank's still. We
No,
lost
no,
somebody,
we
right?
lost
There was-
Johnny Grimmer.
Oh,
Oh, that's Ned Shavira.
Oh, we lost Ned.
We look a
Ned
lot
told
alike.
us he had to leave at 11.
yeah, and I saw him do this. I wasn't sure what that
Yeah.
meant.
That was
He had some
odd
tests he
deal.
had to do.
Yeah.
One question,
George Crook
one
may be
question.
coming on, we hope, soon.
yeah. So to kind of kick this off, because Frank and Bob, Frank, you're currently in a parish, and Bob, you've been out of parish work, right, for how many years?
Since 16. I
Okay.
retired on July the 4th in 2016. I wanted to go out with a bang, and I did. But whenever over those 5 years, whenever I was in the diocese, the vicar of clergy, whose father just died, and I was at his funeral this morning, but he made it a point every weekend. He always had an appointment for me. But now what's happened in our diocese is they've really shrunk the number of masses that are to be done. And old guys like me, it's a rarity that we're invited to help out at a parish on a weekend.
Yeah. So I read parts of your book, and I came to the end of it, and it seems like you're for a very, Richard Rohr in a recent column talked about the flat church, meaning horizontally, that there wouldn't be this hierarchical differentiation, which I think you specified that you thought that it should be very, the laity should not be considered a lower grade Catholic or the clergy elite, something like that. But in our discussions here, when we get together on Friday, there's articles in the newspaper about how seminarians are becoming more conservative, how they want to go back to pre-Vatican II, how they're more into liturgy. And so reading your book, do you have any thoughts on, it's a nice ideal, but how will it be implemented? Given the different, and Tim, you may have something to say about that because you're in a parish. Maybe you want to describe what's going on there, but it seems like there's almost like 2 different churches, if not more.
Oh, let me just comment. All right, so guys, I live in Western North Carolina in the Diocese of Charlotte. And
Oh, good for you.
well, it's a beautiful place, but the young priests who have been ordained in the last 5 years are, and I'm, I'm the same age, we're all the same age, and I guess you guys are a little older, but their focus as priests seemed to be on what I remember reading Old Testament. I call them temple priests. Their major focus is on the liturgy. It's not on the pastoral shepherding of the parish, and that they are so focused on their concept of the purity of the liturgy. And if you listen to some of the younger priests around here in Western North Carolina, is that the problems of the church in declining participation and membership is because we don't have enough Latin masses. And so there's a big push here to have more Latin masses. And they pretty much, to be very honest with you, are just ignoring whatever Pope Francis has said about it. And they're doing so publicly. There's a young priest in the parish next to me who, from the pulpit, is saying that the Pope is close to heresy by, what he's trying to do by shutting down the Latin Mass. And what I don't understand is, the bishop knows this. I don't understand, and I don't have the seminary experience and the priesthood experience these guys have. I'm just kind of the most layman of the laymen in our group here. I just don't understand, what the fuck is the bishop doing? He knows this is going on. Sunday, a friend of mine who went to mass at the parish next to me, the same guy who is, I don't know if you're aware of a magazine called The Remnant. It's out of Minnesota. It's an ultra right-wing, radical, traditional. He gave me the newspaper that they were handing out after mass, and it's calling Francis a heretic. It's saying Vatican II was, wrong, and it's just like, and I'm just saying, my God, I'm going to be 80 years old, and the church seems to be going through a schism of sorts. And so I was thrilled that you guys were on, because I'm curious as to what your take is on young priests and what is it that's motivating them. I mean, they all seem to have jumped on the, and I'm going to give away my stripes, on the Donald Trump as the savior of the world bandstand. And just I'm very confused. I'm just being I'm extremely confused by what's going on with young priests. So, because I live in an area where it's rampant, just rampant.
Mhm. Frank, you want to tackle that? I'll be happy to
I don't know if I'm
comment
gonna
on it.
tackle it, but it is true that that they're coming out of the thing that I was most surprised at after being away, I left ministry in September of 1976 and came back in November of 2016, 40 years.
Wow.
Okay.
And so the thing that I was most surprised at, having been educated in the middle of Vatican II, we were in Rome during the last two sessions, was how stalled it was, how no forward progress it had made. And I think younger priests and perhaps middle-aged priests who are teaching them, informing them, kind of latched on to their conservative interpretation of Pope John Paul II.
Yeah.
Which frankly, I'm not sure is correct. I mean, there's an interesting new book out that says that Michael Novak, George Weigel, and Richard John Newhouse, intentionally misinterpreted John Paul II's encyclical Centesimus Annus to get a church endorsement of capitalism, when in fact the document says exactly the opposite. And so for example, younger priests are being taught this ontological kind of ontology and their ontological mark as a difference.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas if you read the document in which John Paul wrote about that, it's all about shepherd. You know, they say, for instance, in persona Christi capitis. I came back and I said, where did that come from? I remember alter Christus, and this seemed to be the in persona Christi capitis, seemed to be the replacement, a little more dynamic, but not really much different. Well, if you read the document, it says he never said that. He says in persona Christi capitis et pastoris. He adds the relational aspect to it throughout the document. And that, it seems to me, is being totally neglected. So if you go on the website of any of seminaries in the country, John Paul, who, by the way, I'm not a huge fan of his, but I think that there was some wonderful things, you know, very intelligent kind of things that he did. You know, I didn't like his autocratic kind of way. But he said in formation, both of seminarians and new priests, there are four things: the social, the spiritual, the academic, and the pastoral. And as you know, if you read Vatican documents, order is important. How things are said is important. And if you go on, I would wager that at least 50%, if not a much higher percentage, of the websites of seminaries in the United States that have anything about their formation will not have social first. Because what John Paul was essentially saying is the development of the human being is an essential basis for development of all the others. And this is sidelined, I think. Yeah, I mean, it's almost, how can you talk about the development of the human being? We're talking about being spiritual. And so it seems to me that it's rooted in that kind of thinking, which is rife in seminaries. And so there's a young man in the parish next to me, same thing, you know, Catholic, you know, Latin Mass, wonderful, a very nice man, by the way, actually, but very much into this kind of thing. Now, in my parish, that wouldn't go because they pride themselves as being a Vatican II parish. And so, you know, for me, this, in my diocese, this was a wonderful fit. But there's no movement. You know, we have the Eucharistic thing, you know. What the hell does Pew know about real presence? They don't even know what the word means or where it comes from. And we're expecting people to know that. Well, when I go into my church on Sunday and celebrate the Eucharist at the consecration, there's not just a silence in the church, there's a profound quiet in the church. It's not it's not just the absence of noise. There's a profound silence in the church. And lex orandi, lex credendi. And they're totally neglecting this. And so we're getting Eucharistic congresses in years dominated by monstrances, and not by chalices. And you know, so there's this whole trend that's kind of marbling through the church. I think that's resulting in these young men, like, you know, acting like this and believing like this, and just reaffirming that kind of trend. So there is a sense, Tim, I think, in which there are two parallel churches, and unfortunately, at a higher level, we've allowed the political terms conservative, liberal, to be taken in and used in the church in much the same way they're used in politics in the United States, which I think is peculiar to the United States. And it's a very, very dangerous kind of habit.
So Tim,
So let me ask you this.
yeah.
So does anybody other than you, Frank, and others, anybody who's in a position of doing something about it, focused on this issue? Or do they just view it as like inevitable, that this is the way that the church is going to transition?
I think there's a division among the bishops.
Do you?
Yes,
Oh, yeah. I think there's a lot of influential people who have exactly the same concern. Whether they are a majority or not, I don't know. But the fact is that those who are reasonable tend to speak in a reasonable way. The others shout them down. And in my estimation, the loudest voices are the ones that we are talking about and being concerned. And possibilities of influence, even within the hierarchy, I think are relatively limited.
Okay.
It's not like somebody can do something about this. We spent 4 years wondering about somebody do something about Trump. And now the Trumpians are saying somebody do something about Biden, but the powers to do those things are rather limited. The power of the Pope to change things, I mean, you don't autocratically change to democracy.
Good point.
Tim, I had the pleasure a few years back of visiting in Charlotte, a priest there by
Okay.
the name of John Hoover. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he has kind of his own hermitage in
Bob, we lost the sound.
Bob is frozen.
Bob, you're frozen. Many are called, but few are frozen.
Well, while Bob is coming back, Frank, what do you see then about this? This kind of chasm, or different, because people are growing up in two different types of parishes, right? Two different types of. And Tim, I think you said that either your present pastor and a neighboring church, they dismantled all the social services that the church were doing, all the good
Yep.
activities, they eliminated them.
Yep.
Well, I think some of it goes back to how we educate priests. For example, in Boston, and Fred will be familiar with this. Boston College School of Theology is a short walk across the street from St. John's Seminary, but no seminarians go there. I took a course from Rick Alardi, Fred, a couple of years ago. I was the grandfather in the room, and they looked around and said, "What? There were 4 doctoral students and 12 masters in theology students, and there was nobody from the seminary across the street there, because there is this unwillingness to engage outside of the walls of the seminary, and there's a certain control in terms of how people, young men, are being educated. They're afraid of the world.
Mhm.
And so it's, and I don't know really how in the long term you function as in my parish, I have an extremely high level of education and sophistication, etc. So a priest like that couldn't function here.
become destroyed.
And yet I would match the depth of faith in my parish with any other parish.
Okay.
Faith. Faith.
And so I think the solution has to be really radical. We have to give up the Tridentine notion of how we educate priests and find new ways of integrating them into the larger world. So that, for instance, they can't come out of the seminary the way they are, as in a bottle.
Because don't you think, Frank, that the laity are being more liberally educated or have more contacts when they go to school? or not?
Oh, yeah,
Do
they
you
have
think
much, yeah, yes, of course they have and what, why. But for
Yeah.
example, even Pope John Paul II in that document, Pastoris Dabo Vobis, talks about the role of the laity in the education of priests in the seminary. So what seminaries do now is they send a priest out for what's called a pastoral year. That's essentially to teach him how to live in a rectory.
Right.
And so what they should be doing, for example, if they sent me one, I would get a group of parishioners,
Yeah.
4 or 5 astute, sharp parishioners. And anyone who came here would have to have dinner with them without me 4 times a year. And then they would write an evaluation. But they're afraid of that.
Frank, I would recommend you send that suggestion to the Vatican in connection with this synodality sort of thing.
Right.
And if I can piggyback on some of the things that Frank has said, I think that's absolutely the case. In the seminary where I started down in Cincinnati has gone completely conservative. And I ran into one of our younger guys who's still in the seminaries, very early in the seminary. And he shared with me, it was just kind of on the parking lot conversation. He said, these guys that are in the seminary now, they talk about Vatican II as a footnote in history. They have not been exposed to it with any kind of depth of engaging. And a lot of that, I think, terrific as John Paul II was, brilliant as he was in so many different ways.
Yeah.
The unfolding that, I don't know if it was you, George, or somebody, Tim, you talked about, or Frank, you did,
Right.
that after 40 years, nothing's happened.
Right, exactly.
And it was because I think through the
Yeah.
70s, there was a lot of vitality and a lot of efforts in moving in different directions and the rest of it. And when John Paul II became the Pope, he said the time for experiments are over.
Mhm.
And he exercised just a authoritarianism, which came from the reality of Poland in which he came
Yeah,
from. And
exactly.
they all had to held together around
Yeah.
the same thing. So I did 4 webinars with 8 different priests from the Archdiocese of Louisville. And they all talked about their early experience of priests and now their disappointment as priests, because they were excited and energetic when they started, and then little by little, the enthusiasm died. And what happened with our bishops? Okay, so under Paul VI, he appointed Jadot to be the nuncio, who is the thing through whom the guys are proposed. And I understand this. He told him one thing: appoint pastoral priests.
Yes.
Okay, and we had a bunch of those, but John Paul, it became put canonists in there.
Loyalists.
Loyalists, and and I think that coming out of the Second Vatican Council, there was a rump resistance to Vatican II, and it never disappeared. And so little by little, it took control. And I think a symbol of what has happened is a person like Cardinal Burke. He was just determined that law was going to prevail in his perspective. And so he appointed bishops of his mindset across this country. And so Francis got in there and said, thank you very much for your service. And we're going to put somebody else like Tobin in there and like Supich in there. But a great number of the bishops we have are very much looking back. I think that's one thing. The other thing I just add quickly, I think a lot of the young men or even older men that are entering the seminary are home-schooled Catholic children. And those families tend to be very conservative.
Mhm.
And so somehow or other, they've attached to the Tridentine Mass and they're educating their kids at home, and they're not really engaged in the larger church.
Our bishop is one of those guys that you're talking about that Burke installed. Burke was influential in getting Vasha to Santa Rosa, where I am, and Corleone in Oakland, and then San Francisco, and this guy Barber, the Jesuit in Oakland, but because they wanted to remake the West Coast, the West Coast is the left coast, however you want to call it. And so, and I, and years ago, it was interesting, Bob, the way you're talking. I did talk, this is many, many years ago, John Raphael Quinn, we had dinner together. He had a couple of friends of mine, and and we had dinner. And this is shortly after he had gone, well, that's too long a story, but he analyzed John Paul II the way you have. He said John Paul came out of Krakow, and they were fighting communists, and he didn't have a chancery. He just had, it was himself and his secretary. He didn't have a Catholic education, anything, Catholic charities. They didn't have tribunal or anything like that. And it was him against the communists. So he was not, so he has that mentality, authoritarian mentality anyway. And was not used, as Quinn said, he was not used to the sophisticated levels of government that would be in the Vatican. And so, and of course, the guys underneath, the ones who never wanted the council in the first place, they got his conservative trip, and he was busy going all over the world. They're the ones who kind of took over, and because all the bishops at the Second Vatican Council, they went home and started working. These guys stayed in Rome, and they began to take, as you say, took influence. And I think Frank's right. The seminary, the way they're, because these guys come in, and I think, and I've thought too that these young guys, and I think the way you said it, Frank, is right. I've always thought, you said they're afraid of the world. I think a lot of the young people grew up in a kind of a rootless thing, and they want something stable. They want, I don't know, they want something really stable, and they look back to that church, I guess, as a stable place. I don't know, but
Fred, in light with what you're saying, Gary, wasn't there a move to put the clamps on theology and theological teachers throughout the universities? Fred, can you speak to that? And also, at the Lonergan Conference, you get people from all over the world to give talks. So you may have a sense of what's going on in different places throughout the world, not only from priests and sisters who come in, but also lay people who are, giving papers and so forth. So what's your take on this, listening to the conversation here?
I wanted to comment on something Frank said about the seminary. Before STM was taken over by BC, the seminary had a library, and occasionally I would need a book that our BC library didn't have. So I would go over to the seminary, and there would never be anyone in the library. And then I'd go back to BC, to the library, and it would be full of students studying in the library. And I couldn't help thinking to myself, and these guys are supposed to be priests to these other guys. Clientele. But I also wanted to mention, since Frank mentioned Rick Gallardi, Rick Gallardi has come down with a very, very serious form of cancer. So I would ask you all to pray for him. I know God knows how to spell his name, but if you say Gallardi,
He'll get it. Huh?
I'm sure he'll understand. So no, I think a thing that occurred to me when you keep talking about the shift after the Jadot type is that Max Weber, who was a great sociologist, really a founder of modern sociology, he was anti-communist. And that's why he made this big thing about the teachers in courses should just stick to judgments of fact and not of value, because if you talked about values, he'd be talking about politics. And that would be verboten. But he also mentioned, because of his concern with Marx, that Marx predicted the disappearance of the dictatorship of the proletariat. And he said, the dictatorship of the proletariat is a bureaucracy, and bureaucracies never fade away. And I think that's what's true about the Catholic Church, that people feel comfortable in that bureaucratic structure. And the bureaucratic structure is a top-down structure, whereas all forms of initiative come from the bottom up. But it's almost a pledge made by never out loud, by the bureaucracy, never to let these things really come up. And so that's the position, in a certain sense, that we're stuck with. I do think, because of people like Frank, that the Holy Spirit can call people who are not that way, but we need to really pray about that. Another thing we have to really pray about. I know that all you guys in this conversation are always going in that direction, but I'm afraid that's part of the problem. I also really like Tim's terminology of temple priests. But how they can separate, well, also the comment that Frank made about the Eucharist, that's been a constant topic of our conversations. That the real presence isn't the whole ball game, but it has to do with Thomas's saying that the grace of the Eucharist is the unity of the mystical body, and the real presence has to do with that.
Yep.
And it's for the sake of that. So I just wanted to throw that in, but I'm sure, or at least I'm prejudicedly sure, that these priests of the temple are not thinking of that at the time of the consecration or in the overall celebration of the Mass. So they've celebrated the Mass from their job as pastors, as shepherds, as people who are symbolically but actively representing the unity of the mystical body of Christ. So I think this is a real crisis. The other thing that occurred to me when listening to Bob was that Lonergan wrote to a friend of mine who was going to leave the Trappist. Lonergan in a letter wrote to him, which my friend showed me, that when the church has been sitting on the lid for 400 years, and it takes the lid off suddenly, which Vatican II did, there's bound to be an explosion.
Yeah.
And so what we're getting is a reaction to the explosion.
Yes.
And just as the explosion went too far in one direction, so also the putting the lid back on is overdoing the reaction back. So that's a thought that occurred to me while Bob was talking too.
I like to use the image that what Francis has started is the second wave of Vatican II. So if you start with 1965, you have a curve that goes up and then it goes down. And I think Francis is pointing it up again, but it is a battle. One other quick thing about John Paul II, during the 80s and into the 90s, they had these almost regular investigations of the seminaries and what was happening in the seminaries, and they replaced the terrifically Vatican II based faculty
Yes.
with a whole different thing. They wanted, a whole different thing. And I think even, it's a tragedy because I think as Frank has pointed out, much of the stuff that John Paul II wrote is really rich, but it got misused.
I think one of our priests, Sean Rogers, who's, he's the kind of young priest, 30 seconds you fall in love with him. He's a very effective pastor. And he's a pretty bright guy. Theologically, he can go either way. It doesn't make any difference to him. He just cares about people. But he was, I think it was at, I don't know if he was at Catholic U studying there, but I think Raymond Burke was one of the investigators of these seminaries, I think. And I think Sean told me that during their interview, he fell asleep. I don't know, but.
Oh, Burke fell asleep.
Burke fell asleep, yeah.
Well, he didn't want to hear what he was hearing.
Yeah.
And used to call those kind of guys carabinieri della fede, the cops of the faith,
What's that?
Cops.
the policemen of the faith.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's it.
Fred, I didn't know whether you were speaking in Boston without the R and was saying the corpse of the faith.
So Frank, let me ask you a question about women in the church. Here we are, men, we're talking about priests, they're all men talking about, and it seems to me that a lot of the hope is in women theologians, women, lay women, and even some women are in charge of churches. I think what do you think about that, having been married to a woman? Was your wife a feminist?
No.
No.
But I have a lot of parishioners who are.
Do you?
And,
okay.
Yeah. And I think it's a very complicated issue because you're working against a long time tradition. But at the same time, if you look at the history of the church and the role that women have played, or if you just look around the church, if you gather the people who are doing leadership projects in your parish, they're women. And so whether or not we can make the leap, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But I think it's over the long term inevitable. Personally, I can't get beyond St. Paul's thing. There's neither slave or free man, basically. And the emphasis in Vatican II on baptism. There's a funny story about a priest who was teaching a group of children the sacraments. And so they had studied, etc. And he was going over to visit in the classroom to ask them about the sacraments. And so he walked in, and of course, the first question he asked was, how many sacraments are there? And this little girl in the back of the room was, she was losing her arm. She wanted so badly to answer. And finally, he called on her, and she said, 7 for boys and 6 for girls. It's funny, but it's profound.
Yeah. There's a excuse me, go ahead, Frank.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I hope all of you are aware of 2 groups that I think are significant for the upward trend. Future Church, if you are familiar with them, they're based in Cleveland. They've been around since 1970s or 80s, someplace in there. They've been around for a long time, and they are really dynamic, and they're pushing forward with the whole question of women's role, but also refreshing the sense of Vatican II and so forth. So I think that's one thing. Secondly is a relatively new group called Discerning Deacons. And it's really, it was started at a parish in Minneapolis that's run by a Jesuit. I'm forgetting the name of the parish, and a young Jesuit who I think may be exiting from the Jesuits. It's not clear to me, but he's been very involved. They are running a wonderful program of engaging these women who are young women, not old women, young women who are very invested in the church and are patiently moving and pressing forward that this has to change. And I think it's that kind of energy that coming together, I think, is going to affect the change. And I think that, the synodal process, I think that's what Francis is trying to do. And I'm rather confident the people he has that are going to process all that are not the Burkes. I think good stuff is going to come out of that. And Francis is patient. One of his key principles is time is more important than space. You don't need to have what you want right now.
Right.
You have to take time and keep moving forward. And then just the last thing, I think the way that the women, the LCWR, back in 2011, 2010, before Francis came in, when they were after all of the religious women of the United States,
Right.
those women handled that and avoided war and won the battle.
Here
And
comes George.
so the whole thing,
The metaphor.
the whole thing was a contemplative approach that they used. I thought they were genius.
Hello,
Hey,
George.
George.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
George, all of your questions were answered.
Well, I was going to tell you guys, you have to start over because I've now arrived.
You can watch the video.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got
Oh,
nice
that's right,
things
you-
about you.
Well, let me,
May I mention the thing that when Francis was, the first year after Francis was made the Pope, he was together with a theologian from a Jesuit theologian from Argentina. And he came to BC because he knew it was kind of a center of Lonergan studies. And there was a big meeting of people from STM who were very engaged in liberation theology.
What is STM? What's STM?
Well, what did I say? I don't know. Okay,
STM.
thank you.
He's asking what is.
And STM is School of Theology and Ministry, where Frank
Okay.
went and took a course from Gallardi, who we're going to pray for.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm sorry. And they were all talking about liberation theology, but the guy from Argentina said the Pope's way of thinking about that was in terms of what in Argentina they called the teología de los pueblos, del pueblo. Yeah, and I thought, I remember making the remark how in BC, in America, there's no pueblo in that sense. There's no common sense of that you could appeal to among Christians and Catholics, it seems to me. But anyway, I thought that was a wonderful distinction,
Should you say the name?
that there was such a person. I can't remember his name.
I think he's written, Fred, a lot on what he calls the Pueblo Fiel, which was, why Francis, to some extent, got in trouble with the Jesuits in Argentina was because he had an argue with them about liberation theology, especially with those who thought the hermeneutic for liberation theology was Marxism. And he said, no, the hermeneutic is the practices, the faith, and how they live their faith among the Pueblo Fiel. That's what tells you what liberation theology is. So he's very much, it seems to me, he comes at it from this completely other sense of most of the people around him. You know, by the way, I was really happy that he was the one who decided that I should be able to come back, and I attribute that to my saintly mother, who had the foresight in 1942 to name me Francis. But
That's right.
But-
Yeah.
but he, you know, he is bringing a whole new mode of thought to the church, and kind of undeterred. I think his personality sometimes gets him, because I think he gets annoyed with people sometimes. But overall, he's bringing this whole new kind of sense to the church, you know, about, like, the synod, for example, is now that the church isn't what, that we tell you what to do, we listen as to what we should do together. In the priesthood, for example, one of my insights, I guess, or whatever, you know, about Lonigan, about you would have, since I came back, was I've been thinking a lot about that, you know, the sacraments have kind of consummation, if you will. This is especially true in marriage, that marriage isn't real unless it's consummated. I kind of think it's true of all of them, although I've had sacramental theologians argue with me. But like in the priesthood, the theories that the priests are getting today are that if you're ordained, that's it. You're there. You're marked, period. Whatever else happens in life, you're marked. If you take the consummation notion, then the priesthood is really not organically full unless you immerse yourself in the people to whom you're missioned and they immerse themselves in you. And I think that's much closer to the kind of place where Francis has taken us than what we're seeing in seminaries today.
So here's a question about seminaries. And Francis is a Jesuit. Are things different in Jesuit seminaries? So that's one thing. Are people and orders having different seminary experiences than in diocesan seminaries? And then before our time is up, do you have any suggestions to Tim, who's on the front lines in the parish
No.
who are dealing with this stuff?
George, my reflection on that would be that the seminary is part of a much bigger picture that the Jesuits require a person to go through
Right.
before they become a Jesuit. So, for example, they're sent out on mission into different parts of the world. And I think they get very good education that's up to date and good theology and all the rest of it. But that notion of consummation and of integration and of becoming a part of something beyond me, that I'm going to learn all this stuff and that's going to make me important, and then I'm going to get ordained because I'll be a priest, you know.
The head honcho.
Yeah, ontologically changed. I mean, that mindset is still there.
Yeah.
So I think the Jesuits have a different pattern, and perhaps also the Dominicans. I don't know, but that's just my sense of the Dominicans. They have these wonderful young men, and they're out in the world doing something, and then they have to come back and get their academics right before they get ordained.
It's one of the things that worries me in my parish leaving is I have two priests who come here, one for 20 years on weekends, the other for 25. 25 is a Jesuit. He's the Parkman Professor of Divinity at Harvard. He's perhaps the leading Catholic expert in the world on Hinduism, and he's the incoming president of the Catholic Theological Society of America.
Oh,
He talks all the time about his pastoral experience coming here every weekend for as many weekends as he can for the last 25 years.
Yeah.
And Fred, when you made that comment about nobody in the library, it worries me a lot that someone's going to succeed me and be intimidated and, you know, end his service here. but it's
Oh,
very
that's-
much integrated into his identity as a priest. What he does here every weekend.
What's his name again?
Francis X. Clooney,
Yeah, that's-
Clooney, okay.
Clooney.
Yeah,
He's an
You know
old
him,
BC
Fred?
guy. Yeah,
Huh?
yeah, he used to teach at BC
Yeah, he did, yeah.
before Harvard hired him to be the head of the international.
Comparative theology, I think is, yeah.
Wow.
Is he a Jesuit?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
and he spent years in India, right?
Yes.
So are Jesuits the salvation of our church? George, what do you think of that?
I think they're important.
Me too.
What do I think of that, George? Did you ask me?
Yeah, well, Herbert
Well,
Spencer,
the-
etc.
The Jesuits were my salvation, or one of them was.
Well, I
So-
think they may be salvation in the sense that Jesus continually spoke of leaven. You know, it's a mistake, I think, to think everything depends on one person or one
Yeah,
group.
yeah.
That's our
Yeah.
problem. But if we start thinking of varieties of leaven, of
Yeah.
which Jesuits are, they only have value in relation to in relation to others who are also of some influence and concern.
Good point.
So
Under-
they're not the salvation, but they're integral to it, shall we say.
Right.
I have a question for Bob. Bob, you
Yes.
are past president, I think, and very active with the Association of U.S. Catholic Priests, of which I'm a member also, as you know.
Yes.
Not terribly active, but I'm there. I get the impression, however, that unfortunately, the overall, shall we say, median age of members is rather high. In other words, do we have a lot, do we have very many, do we have any young priests in the Association of U.S. Catholic Priests?
Yeah, I would say not just rather high, I would say very high.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we have, I would say that the vast majority of the members of the association are 70 up. And, you know, we have a fair group, 60 to 70, I would say, who are still in active ministry, and some very good guys, very willing to be engaged and so forth. But, you know, what they can do, because they're pastors, they're busy, you know, and they used to have associates, they could do other things, but now I think a lot of the ordained priests that are pastors, they're a solo shop. They have to run, they have to do everything in effect. We do have some that are 60 and lower. So we have one, for example, a priest who's on the leadership team now from up in the Diocese of Fargo, Michael Hicken. He's actually, he grew up in Akron, Ohio here. And he's been in a number of different things, including 4 years on the staff at North American College. And he's done a lot of travel around the world. And I find him, you know, to be very, very thoughtful, informed. He actually, to share a little thing with you, he invited me to do a retreat this past weekend in his parish. And, you know, the bishop found, you know, you had to send his letter of suitability, the diocese did. And somehow or other, that bishop got aware of my book, and he read the book, and there's a section in the book about do we need to be thinking about the ordination of women? And so he said, I don't want him in my diocese at all. So he kind of canceled it out. But we have somebody like Michael Hicken. And then we have a young man from down in West Virginia. He's in his upper 30s, I would say. Very active guy. His father was a coal miner, and he marched in Union things protesting what was being done with the coal miners. And so he's a live wire. We had a wonderful young guy by the name of Simon Carrion, who is from the Santa Fe Archdiocese. He's been working over at NAC. He's been back now for a couple of years, and he has had 4 parishes among the Native Americans there in New Mexico, and 34 or 35. Brilliant.
Mhm.
And he just, I'm going to say now 3 or 4 weeks ago, he announced that he is going to go to the Episcopalian priesthood and that they have accepted him, you know, to prove.
Yeah.
So we've lost him.
Yeah,
You
that-
know?
and to my mind, the difficulty with that is the quote new breed of priests who have been around for 10 or 20 years developing, you know, are going to say, see, that's what those guys are like. They're all a dying breed, and those who aren't are hold on. Okay. You know, they're all just, we're waiting for them to die. I
Yeah,
had,
oh, yes.
I had an experience, this was at least 15 or 20 years ago, of one of these young ones basically saying to me, you know, we're waiting for you to die.
And we're going to fix the church.
And then we'll fix the church. Yeah,
I think they're waiting for Francis to die.
they
They're
definitely are.
salivating.
There's
they're
already 2
salivating.
books from that crowd about what, you know, who should be the next pope.
Cardinal Dolan bought copies and sent them to all the voting members of the next conclave. I read somewhere.
I think he did.
He did.
That was subtle, huh?
He did.
That's,
Yeah, I've got to go, but you can carry on and I'll log in and see what you have to say. But
Can
Bob
we have
and-
these guys? Can we have these guys back again?
Sure.
yeah, it is.
I would
2
be
minutes after
honored.
12.
Yeah, that's fine. I'd like to enjoy
I'd
that.
be honored
I
to
vote yes.
share in your meetings. This has been rich.
Well,
Mhm.
can I make a
Yeah, and I
proposal
think-
that
Next
we
week, gentlemen.
discontinue today? Are the 2 of you available next week? Same time.
I am.
Say
Yes,
yes. Say
Yeah.
yes.
yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Can you,
Okay.
could you, hey, Tom, before we go, could you send their contact information around? Like phone, like, you
Yeah,
know, how can we get?
actually,
Email.
I don't think I've got your contact information except for email address. So could the 2 of you send it to me and then I'll just send it to everyone else?
Okay.
Your
What do you mean by
mind?
contact? You mean hard
address-
address and
address and
phone number? Okay.
You, yeah.
physical address.
I
and
did,
phone number?
could I just ask Father Daly a quick question? Father, you, as I understand it, you were in ministry and then you
Yeah.
left, you got married, and then you
Yeah.
came back, right?
Right. After the death of my wife.
Right.
Yeah.
When were you first ordained and when did you come back?
I was ordained in December of 1967. I
Hi,
took a
George.
leave in September of 1976. And I came back in November of 2016.
I don't know if anybody asked you today, but I'll certainly ask you next week. What were the young priests like each time around?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we don't have
George,
time. I
why don't
don't
you
think.
ask that next week, but watch
I
the
will.
video.
When-
because,
George,
Fine.
when you get my information, if you want to call me, we can talk.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll probably do that.
Feel free. Yeah.
But it'll be really neat
Right.
next week to be able to continue the conversation without spending an hour on introductions.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Well,
And
I
thi-
get an hour, but just by myself, Tom, to be
Yeah,
introduced, don't I?
That's right. You,
Okay. So, hey, George Crook,
Yes, sir.
given that you missed the first whole thing, you get to do the closing prayer.
I'm so cold on that right at the moment. How about if I do the closing prayer next week?
Okay.
Johnny Bremer, you have been very, very quiet. Would you like to lead in a closing prayer?
Sure. In the name of the Father and the Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
We give thee thanks for these and all the benefits we've received from your bounty through Christ our Lord. Amen.
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 I may not be here next week. I've got other things but I'll try to join you if I can.
Good.
Okay.
Well, God bless you guys.
Thank
Great.
you.
And as
Thank-
always,
thank-
God willing,
thank you,
it'll
Bob.
be,
Great having
it'll be
you. Thank you.
recorded.
Thanks.
Big thanks for Tom
Bye.
Thank
for
you.
recording.
Thank
Yes,
you. Pray
Thank
for
you all.
Ukraine.
Okay, thanks.
Bye,
Pray
guys.
for Ukraine.
God bless.
Pray for the conversion of Putin.
Yes.
Don't hold